Hello everyone, I'm Ben Johnson and this is the Perpetual Chess Podcast. On Perpetual Chess, I have weekly conversations with chess players, personalities, authors, and adult improvers about their lives, their careers, and about chess improvement. Perpetual Chess is brought to you through the generosity of its Patreon and PayPal supporters. For more information, go to perpetualchesspod.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. We have a very accomplished chess professional joining us this week, although, of course, he's worked in other professions as well. He's had his hands in many professional activities over the years. He is a chess grandmaster. In the 1980s, he was the top-ranked non-Japanese shogi player in the world. He is a graduate of MIT. He's very active with chess and computers. He worked on Ribka, which at the time was the world's strongest chess engine in 2007 and 2008. He's currently a partner in Komodo Chess. He won the world senior chess championship. And his son Raymond is also an IM, just for good measure. And last but not least, he is a well-regarded chess author who is out with a new book called Kaufman's New Repertoire for Black. It's now available on Forward Chess, and it's coming to the U.S. as a physical book on December 31st, 2019. I've had a chance to check it out, so of course we'll be talking about it. But without further ado, Grandmaster Larry Kaufman, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Had to give you a lengthy introduction there, Larry, because you've done so much in the chess world. I mean, I know you've had encounters with many chess legends. You're a writer. You've done incredible work with chess computers. So it's a real treat to speak with you.
Well, nice to be here. Just one little correction: when you read the title of the book, you said for black, but it's black and white.
Oh yeah, and I have the right title staring me right in the face. So sorry about that. Yeah,
okay.
And of course I read through the book and looked at all the recommended lines, and I'm excited to try out some of the white ones. I do want to start off by talking about the book. So I feel like the best place to begin, actually, we had another chess opening author as our guest the prior week. Who you mentioned in your introduction. I am Christoph Zalecki, who I know you were at least familiar with I think it was Keep It Simple E4 you had looked at in conjunction with working on your material. And yesterday, in what will be last week's episode for listeners, we were talking about how chess computers work. And one thing that we talked about was the Monte Carlo method, which I know you mentioned briefly in the introduction, but I thought it might be helpful for our listeners to sort of begin by explaining the methodology of how you use computers to help you find good opening lines.
Specifically, you're talking about how I use the Monte Carlo programs?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, first point is there's a lot of confusion among people about Monte Carlo engines and neural network. Some people think of it as if they were two names for the same thing, but they're two different things, which may or may not be in the same engine. I can go into that more anytime you want me to, but for now, let's just say that the Monte Carlo, what's called Monte Carlo tree search, MCTS, is a way of looking at the moves where instead of trying to figure out what is the perfect move in some theoretical sense, you're just trying different things and gathering some statistics to see which move is likely to work best given sensible play for both sides. So it's a somewhat different premise. So the Monte Carlo tree search approach is more relevant to what I would say over-the-board chess, whereas maybe the standard, what we call alpha-beta engines, are perhaps more relevant for correspondence chess.
Okay.
In correspondence chess, you're at least trying to find the absolute truth. You're trying to see what is really the best move. But in an over-the-board game with a limited time, you want the best practical chances, and that's pretty much the idea of Monte Carlo tree search programs, to find the move that gives the best practical chances against good opposition.
But it's against another computer opposition in terms of when the programming, it's basically doing iterations playing against itself. Is that right?
Yes, it's not playing entire games. But it's playing out different sequences against itself and gathering statistics. And so yeah, you're correct in that sense that it doesn't have a human inside to play against. It only has a simulated human. But still, it's trying to figure out what will work best against a range of plausible moves rather than what will work best just against the move that it happens to believe that is the other side would play.
Oh, okay. That's a helpful explanation. Thank you. And obviously, we'll have listeners who are very well versed in how chess engines work, and those that are not. So I know so which engines did you use primarily to help you dig through the opening theory for Kaufman's new repertoire for black and white?
Well, the two that used Monte Carlo tree search, which was the basis of the book, I use LC0, which is Monte Carlo and neural network, and then I use the Monte Carlo version of Komodo, which is not neural network, at least not now, but it's Monte Carlo plus Komodo. So then I referred to analysis of conventional engines, but 90% of the book basically was based on the results of LC0 plus Komodo Monte Carlo.
Okay, and LC0 is Leela, correct?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Yeah, and you mentioned in the book that you primarily view your role as sort of a referee.
That's right, because but these engines are playing at somewhere around 3,500 ELO levels, so it's in normal circumstances, it's not very likely that my opinion is going to be superior to either one of the engines, except in cases where I happen to know that they're wrong, like maybe some end game where it's actually possible to say this is a draw or this is a win, or for example, some very, very blocked position where I might be able to judge that there's just no way that anyone's going to win the game, even though one side is obviously better. But aside from those special cases, it's usually not a good idea to overturn the opinion of one of the engines in favor of my own opinion. But when the two engines don't agree with each other, which happens all the time, then we need a way to decide who to go with. And that's what my main role was, is to choose which move to recommend when the two engines don't agree.
Okay.
And there are plenty of cases like that. That happens very, very many times.
And just to give some perspective, I mean, the number 3,500 as a rating is just so shocking. But Jeremy Kane, friend of the podcast, who put us in touch, shout out to Jeremy. I was emailing with him a little bit, and he mentioned, and I know you talk about this a little in the book as well. But so a program like L0 or Komodo, at that level, it could give a 2,400 player a piece odds. Basically, is that about right?
Well, that wasn't true until fairly recently. A couple of years ago, we were never successful in giving night odds to any chess master except in Blitz, but that's changed, and now we've had two matches recently where Komodo Monte Carlo played rapid chess as opposed to blitz chess against masters at night odds. The first match was against a real veteran master, Larry Gilden, he's 77 years old, but he spends his main thing in life is playing rated chess. So he's a real. I mean, he has a USCF master rating, but he deserves it. I mean, he's not like the typical old master that plays like an 1800 player. He actually maintains a master rating, and he is an FM from a long time ago. And so we played a 6-game match with him at night odds at 15-minute plus 10-second time control. And it was kind of a total shock, but somehow or other, Komodo won all 6 games.
Jeez, oh my goodness!
Which nobody could have even imagined that result. I still don't quite know how it happened, but and then a couple of weeks later, we played the aforementioned Jeremy Kane. We just played him 2 games at a somewhat faster time control, 10 plus 5, I think. 10 plus 5 at night odds, and those were both draws. But Jeremy's a stronger master than Larry Gilden now. Jeremy's particularly good in blitz chess. So
yeah, he plays a lot of blitz. So
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but that's just shocking, and I'm sure there's some chess masters listening going, well, they might be able to give them odds, but they couldn't give me odds. But but I don't know. It could definitely give me odds because I've always found it hard to play against computers to begin with. But then, I mean, again, just how strong these computers are just boggles the mind, and it's amazing the insights they're able to provide into openings, which I want to dig into that a little bit. But first, you mentioned also in the book the type of computer that you bought. Could you go into that a little bit for our listeners? Like what kind of computer you were running these engines on?
Yes. Okay, so you have to make the point that there's a big distinction between the CPU and the GPU. The CPU is what runs every computer. We call it the brain of the computer. The GPU is the graphics processor, and you don't even have to have a GPU in general to run a computer. So all of the normal chess computers prior to the last year or two only use the CPU. They didn't. If you had a GPU, it was not even access, except for the part of the graphics. Maybe it might make your screen prettier, but we're not talking about that now. So the new ones, such as LC0 and another one now is Fat Fritz, the ones that they call neural network engines do use the GPU. And not only they use a GPU, but you can say they almost require a GPU. I mean, they will run without it, but if you don't have a GPU, there's not a whole lot of point to getting a neural network engine because they're not nearly as strong as the top CPU engines if you're running them only on a CPU. So with that explained, the computer that I got has 8 CPU cores running at close to 5 gigahertz, which is about as fast as you can get. So it's a very strong computer to start with. But what was particularly important for running LC0 is it had an extremely powerful GPU. It's called the RTX 2080. Which has actually something like 3,000 cores itself, which sounds almost ridiculous, but that's that's the way it is. And so with that super powerful GPU, it makes a neural network program such as LC0 extremely strong. In fact, I would say on my computer, it makes LC0 stronger than any regular engine, even stronger than Komodo and Stockfish. So in general, with the kind of computer I use for this, LC0 would be the strongest available engine. But that doesn't mean that it's always right.
Right.
So there are plenty of situations where the GPU does a better job, And that's where my referee status becomes important.
Huh. Okay. Referee and translator, of course.
Yeah.
So just to give us a little perspective, because not everyone will be that well versed in how computers like how they work. So how much does a computer like that cost?
This computer costs $3,000.
Okay, that's about what I would have guessed. Not like Fabiano's fabled $10,000 machine. Well, that was a couple years ago, so who knows what he has now. But but yeah, I mean that makes sense. I mean, with how fast processors have sped up over time, you don't. I mean, obviously that's a lot of money, but it's not like
Yeah, it's not a fortune.
Yeah, you're not buying a car or anything, or at least not a new
No,
not a new car.
I actually have more expensive computers even than that one, but they don't have they're more expensive because they have larger number of CPUs, but they don't have the GPU.
Yeah. Okay. And to transition sort of to the actual openings, I thought that, I don't feel like we should go too much into specific variations, being that this is an audio only interview, but you did have some sort of some broad conclusions that I thought might be interesting to hear a little bit more about. So number one, this kind of surprised me a little bit, is you say that overall in the analysis you did with engines, white is doing pretty well.
Yes, especially with Leela, with LC0. Leela seems to think white is always a lot better.
Huh. And what would, if we translate it into I know that, like, for example, AlphaZero has its own conversion method in terms of describing an advantage. But what would you describe as a typical advantage? What fraction of a pawn is white getting?
Well, okay. I mean, you have to be very clear on that. With Komodo, we do it about right, in the sense that if we say that we're up one, it pretty much means that we're up the equivalent of a uncompensated pawn in a normal position. I mean, it means what it should mean. But with LC0, that's not always true. They keep changing the way they do it, and I think the current application, it just isn't right. I mean, their typical score for a position where you're up a pawn for no compensation is closer to 2 pawns.
Huh.
So it just doesn't have the meaning that it's supposed to have. I don't really know why they do that. They could just divide by 2 and it would be a lot more sensible. But anyway, that's what they do. So the typical white advantage with Komodo is approximately 0.20.
Okay.
So with LC0, it's typically going to say something like 0.40, but in reality, that's only 0.20.
Okay.
They should divide by 2. But it is generally true that LC0 will report a favorable score a lot more often than a normal engine, even including Komodo MCTS. I mean, there are a lot of positions where Komodo will say that it's heading toward a draw and the score is 0.01 or something like that, and LC0 will still be showing a score like 0.15 or thereabouts.
Okay. And is there, like, in your mind, is there a clear differentiation point where it's headed for a draw versus when it wouldn't be?
Well, I mean, it depends on what stage of the game you're in. I mean, if you're in the opening, 0.20 means white has a normal edge. You can't really, which means that he isn't anywhere near winning yet, but you're not about to agree to a draw either.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're late in the game, then I think the typical threshold, this is on the Komodo scale. My best estimate is that the dividing line between a win and a draw is about 0.7.
Oh, funny. Hikaru Nakamura gave the exact same number when I interviewed him a couple years back.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's funny how that works. But okay, so that's interesting. And again, without going into too much detail about specific variations, I was mildly surprised after seeing that AlphaZero was primarily a D4 player that you went with a 1E4 as the recommended repertoire. So were you finding that white was getting better positions with E4?
Yes, I mean the problem. First of all, it was a positive thing, a reason for choosing E4, and also a negative against playing D4. With D4, it's very hard to prove much of an edge against a Nimzo Indian. Of course, black doesn't have to play. Black can play. White can play knight F3 to avoid the Nimzo Indian. And then we can get into a big discussion of what black's best option at that point is. But overall, I would say that black is coming closer to equality with that approach, or with the Grunfeld approach, which is what I give in the book. Those two approaches both seem to make it very hard to prove more than a token edge for white.
Okay.
But then for white, there were some positive reasons for recommending E4. Some variations that previously looked too equal started to look not quite so equal anymore.
Okay, and I was heartened to see that it's not, given that the top players are obviously at the vanguard of exploring opening theory, digging into this book, I was sort of, I was expecting a lot of main lines, and there are some main lines, like of course the Spanish and the Roy Lopez and the aforementioned Grunfeld, but you managed to find a lot of sidelines or less trodden territory where white can still fight for an edge or black can still fight for equality. But at least until this book gets digested by the chess population, you won't necessarily need to learn 25 moves of theory. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yes, I mean that was always part of my motivation for writing repertoire books. That I recognize, even though I maybe not now now that I'm an old man, my memory isn't so great, but when I was younger, I had a very good memory, and even so, it was hard to remember all the theory of all the complex lines if you wanted to play the most mainstream variation of everything. I mean, it's just so much to recall. So I was always had the attitude that if I could play a sideline that was still almost as good as the main line, but would require only a quarter or less of the theory, I would go for that. So I was always looking for sidelines that were that had more than just surprise value to them.
You're speaking my language, Larry. I love to hear it. As a working dad, to me, that's good to hear. So one other broad conclusion that I thought we could touch on, and then we have a listener question also related to this book. But you also had the conclusion that space is in, meaning that the engines really don't like to give up space. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yes, that's been a trend with the regular engines, but perhaps more so even with the Monte Carlo engines and the neural network, that they seem to believe that space is in general valuable. The typical attitude of grandmasters or chess authors in the past has been something, I'm simplifying it, but something like this, that space is very important if all the pieces are on the board, but if you trade off a couple of pieces, you don't need space that much. It's not that big a deal to have less space as long as you don't have so many pieces that you can't find room for all of them. So that was sort of the typical attitude. But the computers seem to believe that space remains important even after a couple of pieces have been traded. Okay. That's a difference, I would say.
Okay, and obviously that's gonna affect what openings the engine favors greatly. So,
right.
Yeah, I also, when I interviewed Jan Gustafsson, noted opening expert, worked on Team Carlsen. I asked him why no one was playing the French, and he said these guys don't like to give up space. So,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I don't know to what extent. I mean, I guess it's just chess players generally getting a little bit closer to a truth about chess. So, do you happen to know offhand? Like, so I mean, I know you recommend the Tarrasch against the French. So because you're giving up more space in an opening like the French or the Caro or the Pierce or whatever it may be, what kind of advantage would White get in that as opposed to double king pawn or the Berlin and regular classical double king pawn and Grunfeld and openings like that?
Well, of course, advantages in chess are exchangeable. I mean, a lot of times you'll have one type of advantage and you'll trade it for another type of advantage. So you might, for example, be setting out with the idea of getting a space advantage, but instead what may happen is the opponent will give up the bishop pair in order to claim an equal amount of space. So now you have the bishop pair advantage instead. So these things are always transforming. But, I mean, just to talk in general, of course, the Caro-Kann and French are much more likely to lead to space advantage for White. With double king pawn, you tend to get a little bit more tangible advantages, like you'll often get maybe a little better pawn structure. Where a lot of times Black will end up with double pawns or with some weak squares in his pawn structure. So Black may be claiming equality in space, but he'll be paying a price in pawn structure or in having to give up the bishop pair.
Okay,
something like that.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's move on to our first question from a supporter of the podcast and a guest of the podcast, friend of the podcast, Schut, wrote in with a few questions. One of which we've touched on a little bit, but Han phrases it differently. So we'll start with this one, and he's got a few questions lined up, so we'll just take them one by one. Number one, Larry, he says, Han says, what does Larry see as the relative strengths of the top engines? Stockfish, LCO, Komodo, Monte Carlo, Houdini. Does he have a recommendation on when to use which engine?
Well, okay. So first of all, the neural network engine, which is basically is LC0, and now you can include Fat Fritz, which just came out a few days ago. The neural network engines are generally very good at making moves that are that look like what a super grandmaster might play. They tend to be good chess moves in terms of human thinking. Their weak point is when you have to have one exact variation, like you have to play 20 perfect moves for both sides, and that based on that variation, that determines what the right initial move is. In situations like that, you're better off with the conventional engines, Komodo and Stockfish, for example. But if you're in a situation where that's not likely to be the case, where it's not really going to come down to an exact detailed 20-move deep variation or even 10-move deep variation, that's where the neural network engines are shine. And then the advantage of using Komodo and Monte Carlo is that it's kind of a hybrid. It combines more of the strength of the conventional engines with some of the strength of the neural network engines, because the neural network engines all are also using Monte Carlo tree search.
Okay. And you say that Leela is overall the strongest, but we're only talking about, the rating difference would be what, less than 100 points?
Yes, yeah, that's even if you're comparing it to stockfish, or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, of course, it depends on the hardware. I
Right.
mean, I mean, stockfish, I think, is still coming out ahead of Leela in a lot of tournaments because stockfish may be running on 48 cores or 90 threads or some huge number like that. I was talking about on a machine that a person might actually have in his home.
Yeah, that's probably more useful. Uh,
Right.
okay, thank you. And Hans' next question is, do you plan to make the book available on the Chessable platform? I don't know if you're familiar with Chessable. I could explain it a bit if need be.
Well, basically, I mean, I would make it available anywhere that my publisher New in Chess, if they want to do it, I'll
You're in.
be all
Okay.
for it, but got to get their approval.
Great, yeah, and they do have some books on Chessable, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, that would be great. And that reminds me. So you decided. It seemed like you made a decision. I mean, obviously, it's a full repertoire you're providing for both colors. So that's ambitious. Did you have any inkling to sort of go deeper on certain lines at the cost of not analyzing as many openings, or were you committed to the idea of doing a full repertoire? Because obviously you can't go 30 moves of theory deep in every single opening unless it's one of those 800-page books like the old school MCO and Baffords and stuff.
Right. I mean, I committed to doing a full repertoire, but that doesn't mean that I tried to cover every obscure move that the other side might make. I have to cover everything at least in the early stages. I have to cover every reasonably plausible move on the first move or two for the other side. But I made the point in the book that I did make a trade-off of less coverage of obscure moves for the opponent and in return being able to give alternatives for my side, because I don't want the book to be obsolete just because one of
Yeah,
my ideas is ruined.
yeah, that's a nice feature. Yeah, and I guess another way of sort of getting at a similar question would be: do you? I mean, obviously, this is a large scope project. I'm sure it's kept you pretty busy. But do you have any plans of writing? Like, would you go more granular on a specific opening and write a follow up about any of the recommended lines? Or
Well, I did that one time. I did do a separate book on the F3 versus the Grunfeld.
uh huh.
I don't know if I would do it again. I'm more constrained by time these days. I spend the majority of my working time on Komodo and related matters, so my time for writing books is somewhat limited. But
That makes sense. Yeah, and that actually segues into Hans, the third part of his question, which is, and Han said part of the reason he had so many questions was just you're such an interesting guest. And Han asks, Komodo was sold to chess.com. How's that impacting the future of Komodo?
okay, well, that's kind of an oversimplification of what happened. Komodo wasn't just outright sold to chess.com, but chess.com bought a partnership in Komodo along with the rights to use all of the Komodo software in their bots and apps. So we work closely together, but we're not the same. We're not just totally merged. I mean, we run Komodo independently. We come out with our new versions and do our own testing and everything, but we cooperate a lot. Chess.com does help us in a couple of ways. They supply some of the hardware that we use for testing, and they let us borrow some of their skilled personnel for special projects. We have one of their guys has been helping us try to make a neural network version of Komodo, which is they're not quite ready for prime time yet, but I'm optimistic on that. And so they help us in various projects, and we in turn supply them with special versions for their needs, such as they recently put Komodo versions that have all these different personalities, because chess.com is aimed a lot at more typical amateur level players. More, their average rating is something like 1200. So they have a lot of interest in having bots that just play like different personalities and things like that. So we help them with that, and then we also have shows where they have Komodo play against some. Usually it's a grandmaster with some sort of handicap. So we've had a whole bunch of those handicap matches. So we work very closely together, but we definitely both benefit from the arrangement.
Okay, sounds good. Guys, we're going to take a quick break to tell you about an opportunity to buy a rare chess collectible that I think is pretty cool. It's a limited edition set of 4 coffee mugs that feature hand-drawn portraits of all 16 undisputed world chess champions. It's hard to do these mugs justice on a podcast, but I'm going to try. The mugs are hand-drawn by a professional artist, and each mug features 4 of the world champions on it. Each world champion is pictured in front of a chessboard with one of their most famous positions set up. My favorite of the mugs is the one featuring Fischer, Spassky, Karpov, and Petrosian. These mugs were commissioned by a chess fan and listener of Perpetual Chess, and he assures me that only 125 sets of chess mugs were made, and there aren't going to be any more of them. I'm glad I got mine. They're large porcelain mugs that are dishwasher safe. The cost for the set of the 4 mugs would normally be $72 plus shipping, but if you use the code perpetualchess at checkout, you can save 15% on your order. Once again, the site is chessmugs.com, chessmugs.com, and the code is perpetualchess. And if you didn't write it down now, it's in the show notes as always. But now it's back to the show. So, switching topics, Larry, we've got, again, so much to cover with your accomplished career. I was checking out your USCF page, and I was glad to see that you're still competing pretty regularly. And I feel like you might have some unique perspective. We did talk about chess improvement a lot over on this podcast, and I know that you had a peak rating at age 50. So, we interview a lot of adult players about ways to get better. So what has your experience been on working on chess as one continues to get older, as we all do? So how has your game progressed over the decades? How were you able to get a peak rating at age 50, and what has transpired in subsequent decades?
Well, hey, that's a good question. I did my first peak in chess happened at the age of 32. That's when I initially got the IM title. So it's relative to the standards of the time that was when I was at my strongest. But in absolute terms, I think it probably is correct to say that my peak was right close to my 50th birthday. I reached a USCF rating of 2538 just before I turned 50. And I guess the reason is that what changed is that in the earlier period, things were very different. I mean, that was pre-computer, and the literature was still kind of primitive in the sense that you would typically read annotations that were full of errors, and it just was hard to really understand what was the thinking of the great players. But this is talking about like 1980, but by the mid 90s, things had changed, and the standards of all the books and all the available material was much higher, and computers were starting to be useful, and I benefited from all that. I studied. I basically felt like I learned so much about how to judge chess positions during that period. Like in 1980, I was at my best tactically, probably in 1980, but I didn't understand chess very well in 1980. But by 1997, maybe my tactics were slightly weaker, but by then I'd learned from so much reading and looking over games in the informant with the how they were evaluating positions and everything. I just gradually learned, well, oh, this is what's a good position. This is how you tell what's plus over equals. Eventually, I got the idea. I caught I understood it, and by then I was a pretty good judge of positions.
So to the extent you had a secret sauce, it was being an early adopter of chess computers.
Well, I'm wondering how much that actually helped me before 1997. I mean, I was using chess computers from way back, but I don't know how much benefit they really were until maybe I guess they were. Yeah, I guess they were a significant benefit before 97. Yeah, that's probably true.
Okay. And how would you recommend for a typical club player, how would you recommend that they use, like, incorporate engines? What is the proper role for engines for, say, like a 1600 player who's spending 10 hours a week on chess?
Well, of course, I mean, one of the biggest points of having an engine is that if you don't have a private teacher yourself, the engine can review your games and show you where your mistakes were. That's the number one thing. Aside from that, the computer can answer your questions about the openings. Like if you're trying to learn some opening, and you wonder, but what if the guy plays that move? What do I do? And the computer will show you why that move is not in the books. If it's not in the book, it's probably a bad move, and the computer will show you why.
Yeah, well, it will show you the proper response. Some people might struggle to know why.
Well, that's true. That's true. But you can play out variations, and every time it plays a move that you don't understand, you can take it back. And if you think another move makes more sense, you can try the alternate move and let the computer show you why that's bad. It's true that you have to be reasonably good player to really fully benefit from a computer. I mean, I don't know exactly I can't say, if you're 1599, it's
right, yeah,
it's useless, and 1600, it's great. It's a gradual thing, but
yeah, and of course we have a wide range of experience levels listening to this, but suffice to say, the better you get, the more important engines become.
Right.
Okay, I mean that's pretty interesting. And how's your chess going currently?
Well, of course, now I'm 72 years old. I don't play as well as I did, and my rating has dropped. But my USCF rating still in the 2300, so I haven't totally fallen off the map. I think it's accurate to say that I'm the highest rated active player in the country over 70. I think there's one player above me on the list, Igor Foigl, but I think he only plays once a year, so I don't know if you'd call him active.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive, obviously. So how has your game changed? Obviously over 2300 is still very good, and I'm sure your openings are still pretty strong, even though you as you mentioned earlier, maybe you don't remember lines quite as well as you used to. But so which aspects of your game have changed over the years?
Well, I certainly, my opening probably got better and better from all this computer work and working on repertoire books. I would say that's gotten stronger, but I think I make more tactical errors than I used to. I tend to have visualization problems. I just don't, mispicture a position in my mind. I think the bishop is on that square and it's not there anymore, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's tends to happen more, I think, as you get older.
Yeah.
But my judgment is still pretty good, I would say.
Good. And I know you've done a fair amount of coaching over the years. With all of your work with this book and with Komodo, do you still have time to work with students or not at the moment?
I do, but not very much. I
Yeah.
just a couple of students now.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, the main reason I was asking is I was just curious what sort of approach you end up taking with them in terms of how much you're doing on opening versus how much you're trying to help their game overall. Since I mean, you're obviously qualified to do both.
right. Well, that of course is very individual dependent. I mean, and has a lot to do with their level. If they're not at a terribly high level, it's more important to just develop their general abilities as a chess player. Once they get to, I don't know, something maybe in the ballpark of 1800 or so, it starts to pay more to pay a lot more attention to openings at somewhere around that level.
Gotcha. And what are your favorite chess books? So do you still keep up with the literature these days?
Well, I do get I don't buy every book that comes out, but I do get new books sometimes, and especially when when they have some relevance to me. I think you earlier we were mentioning that Keep It Simple book. That was an example of a book that was particular interest to me because there was some overlap with my repertoire, and I wanted to compare what that book had to say with what I was going to say, and see and make sure I didn't either duplicate too much or say something that would be, has already been refuted,
Right.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And did you have? I know that Jeremy mentioned that you had a coach as a kid who had a big impact on you.
Well, I've had a couple different coaches. He might have just been. Was he referring to my first coach?
Yes.
Well, I wouldn't say that he had a big impact on me directly. I mean, I only had 2 sessions with him, but it was just very memorable because this sounds like it can't even be true. I mean, you think I'm just making this up, but my first coach, his name was Harold Phillips, actually played against Steinitz in 1894, and he was the New York champion in 1895.
Wow.
Doesn't even sound possible, does it?
Yeah, so you're 1 degree of separation from Steinitz.
That's right.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, and while we're on the topic of stories that Jeremy prepped me for, I feel like I was going to save this for later, but I think now's the right time. He said you had a good one about your first time meeting iconic American GM John Fedorowicz.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. I don't want to. I don't want to embarrass John. We're actually friends now, but
John is guileless. I think you could say anything about him, and he'll take it the right way.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I was playing him in as an international in the Marshall Chess Club in 1979, which is where that was the tournament where I made my first IM norm, actually. And what happened is we had a very long game. He had white, and he got an opening advantage, and he was nursing it for forever and ever, and I was struggling to try to save the draw. We went into an end game, and he was still playing for the win, and I was still playing for the draw, and it went on for, I don't know, 6 hours or something. It was some very long amount of time. And then finally, after all these hours of play, deep in the end game, John overlooked some trick that I had, and the result was that I actually won the game. I didn't just save the draw. And he was very very upset about it, and we were using my chess set for the game, and he grabbed one of the pawns and walked off and just started to walk out the chess club. And I just said, "John, would you give me back my pawn, please?" And he threw it at me as hard as he could. But the next day he apologized, and we've actually been friends ever since then.
That's funny. So I'm sorry, did you say what year this was? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, 1979.
1979. So I'm going to try to do some quick math on how old John was then. How ashamed he should be. So you would have been about 30. And he would have been
32 already then. Yeah.
He would have been younger, right?
Oh yeah, he's maybe a decade younger than I am, roughly.
Okay. Okay. I'm not going to sit here and I'm in awe and chase it down, but suffice to say he was young. Suffice to say that he was younger. Do you have any other? I know that you've met so many chess legends over the years. You played so many as well. What are your other favorite chess brushes with legends?
Well, I've had things with almost almost everybody. Even I have a couple of things with Bobby Fischer actually. Not so much on a personal scale, but although I did have a game where he served. He was the adjudicator at a tournament I was in. Back then, in the old days, they had adjudications.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and this was maybe, I'm estimating 1964 roughly, or maybe a little later, 65. I had a game with Jimmy Sherwin, international master, and it went to an end game, and I was down the exchange and looked like I was losing, but it wasn't resignable losing. And it came time to adjourn, and so they had Fischer come over and adjudicate, and he did a very good professional job, and he tried to uphold, see if he could save my side against Sherwin's analysis, and he couldn't, so he of course adjudicated correctly for Sherwin. That was my most personal interaction with him, but I had some more interesting things later. That for one thing, in 1975, when he was supposed to play Karpov, so there was, Fischer was demanding certain conditions. He said that it has to be a match to 10 wins, and that if it's a 9-9 tie, he keeps the title. So FIDE and the Russians agreed to the 10 wins, but not to the 9-9 clause. So Fischer wanted to get some kind of mathematical support for his trying to argue that he wasn't making an unreasonable demand. So I got called in to do some mathematical analysis of his proposal, to compare it to the previous way where the champion kept the title on a 12-12 score when draws did count. But anyway, my conclusion was that Fischer was asking for more than the previous.
Yeah, I was going to ask if, as an American player, you were encouraged to put your thumb on the scale at all in terms of how you're ruling.
Well, I was just asked to obviously they wanted it to come out in Fischer's favor, but I had to do a mathematical analysis. I concluded, that Fischer was asking for more. But then they asked someone else. It was Charles Conley. I think he was an international master, to analyze that. He made different assumptions. He went about it a different way, and he was able to come up with some justification for what Fischer was asking. But
give them the conclusion they wanted. Yeah.
Right.
That's funny.
Then I had another thing with Fischer was that this didn't involve any personal interaction, but you probably know that everybody thinks of the increment as basically a Bobby Fischer invention, and Bobby Fischer clock with the increment and all that. But what actually happened was that the use of the increment for chess was actually my invention. But I don't know that I won't say that Fisher knew about that, because I can tell you the story there that in or around 1980 there was a chess clock on the market called the Micromate chess clock. It was the first real electronic chess clock. It was almost like a computer built into a clock. You could program it to do almost anything that you could imagine for a chess clock. So nobody had ever even suggested the idea of using increment for chess. But I got this Micromate clock, and then I fooled around with it a little bit, and I realized that it was possible to set it to do what we now refer to as increment in chess. So I started using it first for shogi play. The shogi players were all using it, and then I started using it for some blitz chess events too. And I sent a letter to the manufacturer telling him, "Hey, you know what your clock can do?" And I explained the whole thing to him, and my name for it was accumulation, and he put that in the manual for the next time he put out an update of the clock, and he put the accumulation game in there and gave me credit as the inventor. And this is exactly the same game that Fisher, claimed as his and made a clock for, but his was later.
Wow.
He probably didn't know about it because the Micromate clock wasn't very popular because it was too expensive. Not that many people had it, and it didn't stay on the market very long after my thing came out. But so I'm not accusing Fisher of being dishonest or anything, but I actually am the inventor on record of increment for chess rather than Bobby Fischer.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, it's good that we can help give you credit where it's due. Yeah, and obviously increments and time delays are. I mean, now it seems inevitable that they would have come into use, but I mean, you and I both played without them for many years, so welcome addition, obviously. So one other chess-related topic that I wanted to talk about a little bit, just because you've been sort of at the vanguard of discussing this. When I interviewed Eric Kislik, I know that he's been a big adherent of following the point values, the correct, in air quotes, but not really in air quotes, the true point values of chess pieces, which you wrote a famous article for US Chess that Dan Heisman also mentioned when I interviewed him. And you mentioned it in the book, and of course, it's important for analyzing openings. So, could you tell our listeners a little bit about where the theory stands in terms of how to properly evaluate the pieces?
Sure. Okay, so there's a couple of points there. It makes a difference whether you just want to have a set of numbers to use for the whole game, or if you want to go into more detail, such as having a different set depending on whether the queens are on the board or off the board, that sort of thing. Yeah,
which you do mention in your book, but I think for the sake of the conversation, I think as simplified as possible might be the way to go.
Okay, so the system that I give in my book is with pawns defined as 1, to count the minor pieces, knight and bishop, as 3.5 rather than 3, but with an extra half point if you have both your bishops. So 2 bishops are 7.5, not 7. And then rook is 5.25, and queen is 10. So on this scale, you get the right answers to most decisions, most exchange decisions. Now, regarding bishop versus knight, if it's an unpaired bishop, the bishop is usually still a little better than the knight, but it's less than a quarter better. So it's not. I don't put it. I don't put that into the numbers, but you should keep it in mind that other things being equal, even one bishop is better than a knight. Obviously, depends on the position, of course.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but those numbers are the consequence of those numbers. If you some of the conclusions you get from that are that the exchange, if it's a rook for a knight, is worth a little bit under 2 pawns. So usually you'd rather have 2 pawns in the exchange, but that isn't really true if you're in a deep end game. It's more of a statement for the earlier part of the game. And but the bishop pair being worth half a pawn means that if you have the bishop pair and a pawn for the exchange, then you're only down a quarter of a pawn.
Right. Which
means that you don't need a whole lot of excuse to give up the exchange for a pawn and the bishop pair. You just, if you get a lead in development, or you give the guy an isolated pawn, or any reasonable positional achievement could justify it. So that's one conclusion. Two pieces for a rook. So 2 knights for a rook is on average about a 1.5 pawn advantage. But there too, if you're deep in the end game, even a rook and 1 pawn, it tends to actually be a little better than 2 knights. But if you're early in the game, the 2 knights can make up for a rook and 2 pawns. But on average, it's about 1.5 pawns. But then again, if it's bishops, then actually, I think I made a slight mistake there. 2 knights is 2 knights is 7, but a rook and a pawn is 6 1/4. So I should have said it's a 1 3/4 pawn. I made a little mistake there. That's on average. But when it's 2 bishops, then it's actually rook and 2 pawns is still not quite equal to 2 bishops. It's another quarter pawn needed. So 2 bishops is actually as good as rook and 2 pawns plus a little positional compensation.
Yeah.
And then you can look at the queen. The queen versus rook, knight, and pawn is a quarter pawn favorable. So other things being equal, you choose the queen side, but you don't need a whole lot of positional justification to choose the other side. But if it's rook, bishop, and pawn, and the bishop is part of a bishop pair, then the side with the lesser pieces is a quarter pawn ahead. Then it's the queen that needs to have a positional advantage to make it fair.
Yeah, it's interesting because they're not huge differences from what we've grown up on, but they're meaningful for sure. One question I had asked Eric when he was talking about it a little bit is I teach a lot of beginner level players, and I know that a decent number of our listeners do as well. So do you have a sense of how to communicate that to kids, if at all?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, and of course, it depends somewhat on the age of the kid, whether it's a kid who even understands fractions yet or not.
Yeah.
I'm actually somewhat inclined to say that if you really if you have a kid that you think can understand half, but not, you don't want to go into anything beyond halves, then I would say to teach 1, 3.5, 5.5, and 10.5.
Okay.
That scale works pretty well and doesn't involve any math beyond half.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, because for the kids I'm teaching, even the bishop, like the concept of a bishop pair would, probably fly over their head. But the values you just laid out, they can largely handle, I would
Right,
say.
but you can still say the bishop pair is another half because it's,
Yeah, exactly.
keeping it in
Yeah.
half.
Yeah, you can put it in terms. Although, of course, in their games, it's it's pretty useless when you're hanging all your pieces. But
Well, that's true. That's very true. Yeah.
but no, that is helpful. Thank you. So just one other topic. I feel like we should talk about shogi a little bit. I mean, it's amazing that you've accomplished so much in so many things. So one listener in particular had a few shogi questions. So friend of the podcast and supporter Peter Newhall. For those who don't know, people who donate on Patreon to Perpetual Chess are able to find out guests and send in questions. And I gather that Peter has some interest in shogi as well from his questions. So Peter's first question is, how much carryover is there from chess to shogi and vice versa? I.e., is it easier for a chess FM to reach an analogous level at shogi, or the other way around?
Well, we have a fair amount of information about that. It's clear that shogi players can become decent chess players much more quickly than vice versa. I mean, some great shogi players from Japan have reached master level in chess very quickly. But that doesn't mean that they became grandmaster. They just
do you know how quickly, roughly?
Well, I have a funny story I can tell you about that. Okay, Moriuchi was has been many times the Meijin, which is, you can say, world champion of shogi. He and Habu were rivals, trading the title back and forth many times, roughly 20 years ago or so. So at one point, Habu took up chess and reached IM level. I don't think he ever got the title, but he certainly reached IM level. But Moriuchi took up chess, but he didn't devote that much effort to it. And the reason I can say that with some confidence is this story. He came over to America to play in the American Open, his first chess tournament. He was playing there as an unrated, and the Japanese people knew who he was, but I think that most of the ordinary American chess players just thought he was some random Japanese guy. And so he did very well in the early round. He got a good score, and somewhere after a few rounds he got paired with my friend Jack Peters, international master. Peters was close to the GM title at one time. He was quite a strong player. Anyway, they played their game, and Moriuchi totally outplays Peters.
Wow.
And I think he won a pawn maybe, and finally got to a rook in game where it looked like a fairly routine in game to win. But he played the ending very poorly and only drew. So after the game, and Peters had no idea who he was at the time. So Peters, was really kind of like annoyed or puzzled, like he almost thought that this guy was a cheater or something, because he said, how could you play that well and then play the rook inning so poorly? And Moriuchi said, well, I've never played a rook ending before.
Unbelievable. Wow.
So that's okay. So anyway, that answers that question. He obviously hadn't played much chess.
So Larry, I'm always trying to hunt down people who've made impressive rating gains as adults, who came to chess as an adult and achieved a lot. We do a series called Adult Improvers where I interview such players. So it sounds like, it might be like some sort of cheat code with the way his brain works, but it sounds like he might have been one of the best examples if he took it up as an adult and wasn't FM strength or IM strength, without playing rook endings.
Well, right, but it just shows that because of his ability to be a world champion of shogi, almost as soon as he learned the rules of chess, he was already in probably 1900 or 2000 level.
Man,
just because of being able to calculate deep variations and see check rates and evaluate who's winning. I mean, he didn't have to know much about chess to reach that level, probably. Now, on to go the other way from chess players who took up shogi, my experience was that it was a big help for me. Mm-hmm. Because what happened with me was that in 1976, I gave up tournament chess for 3 years to concentrate on my career, but during that time, I'd learned shogi. So I figured I could play shogi as a hobby because that wasn't something that would take up a whole lot of my time the way chess tended to do. So I got really into shogi for that time period. And then in 1979, I made the decision to come back to chess again. So up through 76, I had never had any result that was even particularly close to an IM norm. I mean, I tried it a few times, but I don't think I even came within 1 point before that. But after 1979, or starting in, I should say in 1979, when I came back to chess, it took me a few weeks to get back into it. I did I had a 1 week training session with Grandmaster Leonid Shamkovich to get myself back to knowing what current theory was like and so forth. But after I did that, once I started to actually play in norm tournaments, just one after another, I knocked out 3 IM norms with a point or a point and a half to spare in every case without a break. I immediately got the IM title, and according to the chess metric site, I almost reached the world top 100.
That's interesting.
And it probably can't be a coincidence that it was just after an intense period of playing only shogi.
So that ties into one of Peter's other questions, which is learning shogi beneficial to one's chess, or only in cases where one's burned out on chess? So do you think that it was a renewed interest, or that there was actually something tangible that you learned from shogi that you were able to apply?
I think what it probably was a change of a thought process during the game, because I think previously I was too focused on the result of the game. Like when I played chess, I was under the delusion that you had to constantly think about whether this game is going to end in a draw or somebody going to win, and I had to play totally differently depending on whether I wanted to win or I wanted to draw. But with shogi, you don't have to think like that because there basically are no draws, or almost no draws. So I got used to the idea of just trying to find the best move and don't worry about the result. And that thinking is much more effective in chess than the other way of thinking. And the other factor is I think shogi is much less materialistic. So I think I got the way of thinking that it's okay to give up a pawn for reasonable compensation, which I think prior to that I was probably just way too materialistic.
Wow, those are really good insights. Yeah, and certainly, we're hardwired for those issues, being results oriented and being materialistic, as Jonathan Rowson famously documented in the 7 Deadly Chess Sins. And one last shogi related question from Peter, which was, so if Magnus gave up chess and decided to play just shogi, how strong do you think he could become?
Well, the closest thing to that is that
his trainer. I know where this is going.
Peter Hein Nielsen did in fact take up shogi, and I mean he didn't take it up at the expense of giving up chess. But I mean, he's got taken it up in a fairly serious way. I gather he's quite interested in it, and I believe that I think he might have earned the 4Dan rank, which would maybe be something like the expert rank in chess. I would say. So I mean, I guess the short answer is that if Magnus if now at his present age if he switched to shogi, well, for one thing, he'd be handicapped a little bit because he probably doesn't speak Japanese, and so he wouldn't have access to all the the literature and the TV shows and the videos and everything.
Do you speak Japanese?
I tried to learn enough to at least read some shogi books. I learned a little bit, but I can't say that I speak Japanese.
Okay. Wow, it's fascinating stuff. Yeah, I can't imagine being that good at chess and then putting that much time into another game and seeing the results you did. It's quite impressive. So just out of curiosity, with shogi in Japan, is it similar to chess in that the world-class players are almost always start pretty very young?
Yes, very similar. They usually turn pro by somewhere around age 14 or 15.
Man, okay. And are there school programs? Do you happen to know?
Well, I'm not sure if they're if it's after school or in the schools, but they have a training. Well, if you want to become a shogi professional, they have this what they call the shorakai, where kids play each other under strict supervised conditions and work their way up ranks, and if they can reach a certain level, they can turn pro. So it's possible for kids to be training to become pros in the shorakai while still attending regular school too.
Okay. And I'm putting you on the spot here, Larry, but is there a book that sort of describes the shogi culture? I mean, obviously, I'm sure there are listeners who either are already into the game or would consider getting into the game, but is there any book that describes the world of shogi?
Well, I mean,
or other resource, of course.
Yeah, I got into it back in the mid '70s because there was a British magazine called just Shogi, which came out monthly, that was mostly translations from Japanese sources, and that was my introduction to shogi culture. Now they stopped publishing, I think, in the early '90s. I think you can still get back issues of it, so that would be one possible source. But there are several books that that describe various aspects. There's a book by Tony Hosking, I think it's called The Art of Shogi. That might be one that would be along the lines of what you're talking about.
Okay, thanks. And of course, I'll put that in the show notes. And Larry, last topic, if you're up for it. This has been an absolute treasure trove. So I really appreciate your answering all these questions. So I was curious about your experience as a chess parent. You had 3 kids, and of course, your son Raymond has made it to IM. So you've got to be one of the strongest father-son chess combinations in modern chess history, at least. So what was your experience like as a chess parent? At what age did you introduce Raymond to the game, and how hard did you push him, if at all?
Well, it was kind of interesting. His first introduction to chess, I mean, I taught him the rules when he was, I guess, 5 or something, but he wasn't, particularly into it. But so when he was 6 years old, we were living in Florida at the time, and my friend Grandmaster Arnold Dinker, who was U.S. champion back in the 1940s, happened to come by to give a simul. And it just happened to be a couple blocks away from where we lived. So I had Ray play in the simul. I mean, it was for kids, so it was okay. So that he actually had a official game in the simul with his grandmaster when he was 6 years old.
Wow.
But anyway, I got him I got him playing in kids tournaments. He wasn't particularly outstanding at that point. He did win the county primary school championship in third grade. It was I remember it came down to it was a disputed tiebreak situation with another player who eventually became an IM. But anyway, but he didn't really take to it too much. His rating didn't. He stagnated something like 900, and I thought he just was not really that interested in it, and not much happened until he reached the age of 12. And then he got real interested again on his own, and it wasn't because I pushed him into it. He started to really study chess and play as many events as I could take him to. And he made just about the fastest progress of anyone I've ever heard of. He went from 900 to master in 3 years.
Wow. And what was he doing? What was his secret?
Just spending a lot of time studying chess.
Were you analyzing games with him a lot and stuff, or just giving him books, or all of the above?
I mean, I certainly did, work with him some, but my recollection is he did most of it on his own.
Huh, that's impressive. Wonder what he did. Wow. And your other kids, you introduced it, but I guess they just weren't that into it?
Yeah, I have 2 daughters, but neither of them showed a big interest in it. No.
Okay. All right. Well, Larry, I think we've hit all the topics on my outline. Obviously, I could, there's many more I could ask you, but is there anything else you wanted to say before we let you go?
Well, I mean, I guess we covered most everything. I guess I just would like to say that I hope other chess players can have the attitude that I do, that you don't have to give up just because you're getting older and your results might be dropping, but if you work at it and you assuming you don't have some dementia or something like that, you can still play a pretty good chess game even in your 70s. You don't have to, you can fight against the aging process.
Wow.
That's what I want to say.
Well, that's great closing words. I mean, it's inspiring. I mean, it's great to see that. I mean, you've had so many experiences and done so much in the world, and to see you still out there, giving people, testing the youngsters and sharing your stories is incredible. So I don't know. I saw you do have a chess.com profile. Is there anywhere else for people to keep up with stuff you're doing, or should they just keep an eye on New in Chess and Komodo and so on and so forth? New in Chess Publishing, that is.
Yeah, well, we do have a Komodo Chess on Facebook.
Okay.
And, I might. Some people have suggested that I do something more in the new social network field to popularize developments with Komodo and everything. So maybe I might get into that, but
yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, if you could stream just how someone with your experience level. I mean, obviously the programming is going to go over, 98% of the chess audience's head, mine included. But just how you interface with engines might be interesting if you ever are looking for even more stuff to do.
Yeah, and I guess I hope we're going to be able to continue to have handicap events between computers and humans. I mean, I find the idea of computers playing against top strong human chess players interesting, and people gave up on it once it became obvious that the computers were better than the world champion. But I think I've kind of shown the way to how to keep it going. That handicap chess makes it so that it's always possible to have an interesting battle between the top humans and the top computers.
Yeah, I agree. That could be really interesting to see what unfolds. So just in closing, a reminder to listeners, the book's already on Forward Chess, coming soon in print. Although, as Christoph Zielecki and I discussed last week, online is quite helpful for these opening books, in my personal opinion. But wait for the print book if you like. But there's a treasure trove of potential avenues of exploration within Larry's Repertoire book. So thank you for taking the time to write it from all your professional responsibilities, Larry. And thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thanks to everyone who helps make Perpetual Chess possible, most of all to my producer, Matthew Passy, but also to everyone who helps spread the word about the show, whether via word of mouth, positive reviews on Apple Podcasts or other platforms. All of that stuff helps more people find out about the show. But most of all, I want to thank the people who support the show financially. You guys have enabled me to continuously work to improve and now expand the Perpetual Chess podcast offering. So for that, I am forever grateful. I would like to give thanks to the following people and entities. Special thanks to Chessable.com, Quality Chess Books, the Capital City Chess Club, Apprentice's Twitch channel, Andrew Bach, Austin Clef, Benjamin Porteau, Kathy Carr, Chad Oliver, Dan O'Hanlon, Danny Davidson, David Schreiber, I am Dimitri Schneider, Faraz Sawaf, Gary Foreman, Greg Natel, I am Greg Shahadi, Guven Manet, Jens Green, John Jernigan, John Cromarty, Kelly Palmer, Lone Pine Chess, Lorraine Dore, Lucio Casada Silva, the law offices of Stuart Katz, Michael Kahn, Mike Zelazny, Moonmaster 9000, where you been hiding, Moonmaster? You haven't asked a question in a while. Reuven Fisher, Seattle Chess Club, Thomas Stonix, Thomas Tachenko, Todd Bryan of Strong Chess, Todd Kennedy, and I would also like to give thanks to the following people and entities: Aaron Waffler, Ace Vallega, Adam Ralph of ChessEngland.com, Adrian Gutierrez, Alex Pejas, FM Andre Terakov, Andrew Perry, BetterChessTraining.com, Bill Moran, Brad and Andy Rosen, Brett Howard Lynn, Brian Mullis, Chad Hilton, Chris Balcom, Chris Flanagan, Chris Wainscott, Christopher Baumgartner, Christopher Chabris, Chris Lott, Christopher Wood. I am Christoph Zielecki, a.k.a. Chess Explained, Coach J's Chess Academy, Courtney Fry, Daniel Gell, Daniel Ginsberg, Daniel Lucas of U.S. Chess, Daniel Naylor, Dave Saylor, David Cramley, Dalen Shelton, Dwayne Edmonds, Ethan Smith, I am elect, Donnie Ariel, or possibly not I am elect. Either way, Donnie Ariel, Fox Valley Chess Club, Frank Tortoris, MD, Gary Andrews, Gary Lewis, Geert Vandervelt of Chessable, Gerard Barta, Giovanni Russo, Han Schut, Harish Srinivasan, James Bonastia, Jason Anfang, Jason Woolham, Jeffrey Martello, Jerry Wells, JJ Stranad, John Fernandez, John Fontaine, John Hartman, John McMurtry, Jordan Goodwin, Justin Gardner, Jen Shahadi, Joel Rocky, John Thompson, GM Josh Friedel, I am Kare Christensen, WGM Katerina Nemtsova, Kelly Palmer, I am Kostya Kovutsky, Krishna Gopala Krishnan, Larry Ryforth, Laura Belyavsky, Martin Knudsen, Matthew Passy, Matthew Tedesco of SeattleChessMeetup.org, Mechanics Institute Chess Club of San Francisco, Michael Allard, Miguel Aristide, Mr. Mike Shahadi, Nate Salon, Neil Bruce, Olaf Mueller-Michaels, GM Pascal Charbonneau, Passy Passanen, Paul Bain, Paul Clarkson, Paul Swaney, Paula Santana, Peter Lux, Peter Merrifield, Peter Sodi, Randy Temple, Ricky Grijalva, Roy Yearwood, Ryan Berg, the Say Chess YouTube channel, Scott Doherty, Scott McKinnon, Sebastian Finsterwater, WGM, Tatyav Abrahamian, Tim Brennan of TacticsTime.com, Tim Seymour, Timothy Ha, Tom Edsel, Tomas Komanich, Tony Rotella, Tyrin Price, Victor Vrancoulge, Wayne Beam, William Brock, William Peterson, FM Zhao Cheng of Chess1000.com, and last but never least, Zhivko Stoyanov. Thanks, everyone. I will catch you guys next week.